Hello, everyone. I'm Janelle Pizarro.
And I'm Frederick Philip Von Weiss. And thank you for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology
that love what they do and do tech good.
And we are with Josh Clark. Josh, I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Well, I'm really happy to be here between you two. It's a Thunder Nerd sandwich.
Yay!
That's right. Thunder Nerd sandwich on rye.
Delicious.
Maybe pumpernickel. Who knows? I like pumpernickel. What's your favorite bread, Josh? Let's talk real stuff. Let's dive in.
I wouldn't have immediately thought of it, but it's colorful and delicious.
Right?
It's a good call.
Yeah. It's very good with tuna salad. Josh, tell our audience a little bit about you, if you don't mind.
Besides my love of pumpernickel, I'm an interaction designer. I'm the founder of a design studio in Brooklyn called Big Medium. We focus on design for what's next. So trying to help organizations to figure out how to adapt the emerging technology that's here right now to make meaningful change and hopefully make the world a better place along the way too.
Oh, that's great. So how are you guys doing that? How are you making the world a better place? What's some of the aspirations?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is how can we make technology that focuses attention instead of distracts it, that bends to our lives instead of the reverse. I think often we find ourselves bending to technology. Yeah. So part of this stuff is how can we create experiences that, sort of fit into a human worldview instead of cramming humans into a technological one. So for a lot of the last 10 years, a lot of that has been a focus on how do we sort of push the frontiers of mobile and use all of the interesting sensor-packed stuff to make appealing mobile experiences. But I would say in the last couple of years, there's been a real shift into how do we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to do things that the machines can do interesting or useful things, either to take sort of menial tasks off of our plate, or perhaps to give us insight and sort of amplify our judgment and our own ability with the kinds of patterns that they're able to find. So a lot of that stuff can be in the healthcare realm, is some of the stuff that we've been working on in machine learning, to find patterns around that. So it's a few different aspects. I'm passionate about the new kinds of interactions that we're able to have, but also what are the new kinds of problems that we can solve without hopefully making new problems, which is often the way the technology goes, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And do you think that was a lot of your concept with like writing, designing for touch?
Yeah.
So you're, essentially like trying to solve maybe a problem, like, or even posing like maybe solutions for machine learning and growing with humans, like almost like a graduation from touch devices and connected devices like that.
Yeah, right? Well, if you think about it, it's like machine learning is powering all of the emerging technologies that are really interesting right now. It's kind of the oxygen of the interaction world right now. So all of the speech recognition, natural gesture, predictive interfaces, augmented reality, all that stuff relies on this kind of pattern finding that machine learning is enabling. So it's underneath everything.
Yeah.
And so as with design for touch was interesting because it suddenly created this illusion that information was physical, that you could drag it around, squeeze it, pinch it.
Yeah.
It's sort of this useful illusion or piece of misdirection. And now we're at the next phase where we can sort of talk to information as if it is a person. Hey, Siri, I'd like to have this information. Or if you prefer to bark at Alexa. It's an interesting way that all the different platforms talk to each other too. It's, hey, Google. Hey, Siri.
And I think this goes to your talk, the new design material, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm giving a talk. It's a very brand new talk because I'm talking about brand new things. To think about how do designers work with machine learning as a design material. And I think that's the way to think about any new technology is what's the new stuff that this material does and how do you work with it in the way that the material wants you to work with it? What does machine learning want? And how does that marry with what people want?
Yeah. Well, how would you design, maybe something small for Alexa? What is your first step for making an Alexa, what are they called? Tasks or skills? Yeah.
Right. I think with anything, the first thing, let me back up. I think that it's okay to build some silly toys first, especially
And
when
fun.
you're getting, yeah, that's right.
Good way to
Hopefully
learn.
silly and fun. Yeah. But we're at our most human when we're at play. And we tend to sort of put aside the demands of what are the metrics and OKRs that we need to hit of all this stuff, and more sort of like really playing with the material. So I think that it's okay to first think, it's like, well, what would be a fun, silly thing to play? In part because it pulls us out of our rut of how do we usually think about design problems. Because I think that when you look at who are the best interaction designers in the industry, frankly, video game designers really bring a lot, because their challenge is they have to make something that's novel and fun, and that you don't have to read the instructions for. That sort of the thing explains itself as you use it. And so I think that making games and toys can be a great way to, as a side project, get to know how to work with a new technology as a design material. So I think that if you're sort of new to making an Alexa skill, or working with any kind of new emerging technology, making something a little playful is a good way to start.
Cool.
It's not what you want to release as a product. Like, I think that we have a lot of frivolous things that are being pushed out as products. And so I guess I want to make a distinction. In our practice, let's play so that we can learn how to make meaningful, useful products that don't just sort of add to the absurdity of the world, which is something I think useful that Kate O'Neill talked about in her talk here about tech humanism.
Yeah.
So you're saying create Alexa skills that, repeat what you say, but in Piglet. Or,
sure. Why not? Or, and also I guess playing with, I think one of the things that I think about a lot when working with a new technology is what is the grain of this new design material? What does it enable, and what does it encourage, and what's the new thing of it? It takes a while to figure that out. But when you think about speech interfaces, there's sort of like, well, what are the new physical contexts that it enables that you wouldn't be able to do with a screen? What are the constraints of it? But also, what are the emotional contexts of it? What does it mean that you're talking to this disembodied personality floating in the room?
Yeah, there's something. Yeah.
Yeah. And what does it do to the people around you? So we have an Echo at home, and it understands me and our 18-year-old daughter, Veronica, about 90% of the time. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? It understands my wife, Liza, never.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And so, we hooked it up to some stuff in the house to turn on the lights or whatever, and so Liza will come out in the morning and be like, Alexa, turn the lamps on. And it's like playing children's Christian music. It's just like, she's like, yeah. And I'll try to help, Alexa, turn the lamps on, and it'll work. And she's like, oh, your girlfriend listens to you. And now it's awkward for us to talk to Alexa in front of Liza, So there's this real thing that happens, which is just a computer system.
Yeah.
But it has taken on this personality of this unwelcome person in our house.
Oh, no.
That is something that you have to consider in the design of these things. What goes wrong? How does it change relationships? How does it change us?
Yeah. How does it change?
Does.
Yeah. How does it change us as we grow up with it? One of my buddies, his son is 3 years old, and he's always been able to tell time by going, Alexa, what time is it?
Yeah.
And he was talking about, he was in the store, and his son just said, Alexa, what time is it? Just expecting that to be there. Like, and when does that actually happen?
Yeah. Well, I think with kids, it's really interesting because, I think early on there was some concern with Alexa of, are we teaching kids like not to say please and thank you? It's just like giving orders. Alexa, what time is it? It's sort of this. And so Amazon has come out with Alexa for Kids, which is a little nervous making, right?
Sure.
But it will, when it's sort of in kid mode, sort of say, you could say please, or, you could say thank you. So
Cute.
You don't have to, but it's sort of these prompts around it. It is cute, and I think it's useful, but it's also sort of a thing that it sort of also assumes that there's a one-size-fits-all parenting mode.
Yeah.
And I think, look, we're at the beginning of all of this, but it's the kind of thing of like, do I want Amazon to do my parenting? And even if so, are their sort of parenting values of their designers the same as mine?
Right.
And do I want Alexa correcting my kid? And if so, how? It's like, it's a whole source of different interests.
Wow.
And what separate relationship is my kid having with Alexa over there when I'm not around?
True. And cultural values too. I mean, you know, a Hispanic culture is definitely different than like, you know, the, you know, Asian culture, right? Like that would be weird as well to like maybe put an Alexa in a Hispanic, you know, household, and it's completely different than, you know, what it expected it to be, right?
You bring up a whole huge important area that sort of, you know, of the machines know what we teach them. And so it's like, what is the data that we're providing to them, and who's doing that data? And frankly, you know, you look at a lot of computer vision, face recognition stuff, and it works great on pale males. You know, pale males, actually, I would say everything works great on pale males. Alexa listens to me more than it, right? It's like things, as in so many things, cut my way because I'm a straight, white, middle-class, educated American man. Like, man, things go my way all the time. And in a way, we're sort of embedding that bias into these systems because that's where the data is, and that's the data that's been gathered. And so is this something that as we do this, are these systems just going to reinforce my power and privilege at the expense of others? Or is it going to steamroll culture as Google suggests phrases to use to respond to email? Does that mean that there's going to be a very specific Silicon Valley vernacular that gets imposed and spread? And is that going to flatten, you know, other dialects?
But would you also say too, to a certain point where you look back at computer language and you look at maybe the last 30, 40 years, how most things that you would write in English. You would write HTML in English. No matter what country you were from, you wrote HTML in English. You know, you still spelled color if you were in the UK without a U, because that's the HTML way to do it. So do you think like there's some kind of parallels there?
Well, I think so, right. I mean, in that case, that's sort of like it became the lingua franca. Sorry, French, you know, you're sort of out. It's English is the technology language. And so at some point you need to sort of choose something, especially if you're going to give instructions to computers, this is how it is. But I think you're right, is that it does create a bias of access to who can code, that you have to have that baseline understanding of this other language in addition to the logical language. But the risk is, of course, that we're also creating those kinds of decisions inadvertently and probably with the best of intentions, but about who can use these systems, or do I recognize myself in these systems, or does the system recognize me? You know, there was a study of Google speech translation from 2016, so only a couple of years ago, that found that there's a bias against understanding women. So 70% of the time, the system would understand the speech of a random woman better than of the man. Despite the fact that women tend to speak more slowly, more clearly, longer vowels, great for recognition, except for these systems did not. And this is clearly a case of just bad data skewed toward understanding dudes, because that's who presumably built this system. So a lot of this, as we think about how do we create these machine-driven systems, is how do we give them the data? How do we make sure that we are aware of our own blind spots and actively trying to fill them? And a lot of that goes to the teams. Who do we work with? The teams cannot look like me. You know, it's like, and I don't mean just in terms of demographics, of race, ethnicity, gender, age, that kind of stuff, but also, you know, almost worldview. You know, how do we get outside of the tech bubble and bring in philosophers and civil servants and artists and every walk of life, because this stuff is affecting our entire civic life now. These systems determine how we speak to one another.
It's really shaping our global culture.
Right. And let's at least do that with intention and not let the machines decide to do it. I like to say that the future should not be self-driving. You know, we need to sort of decide where we want it to go, or the machines will decide for us.
That makes sense. I mean, we can see it too in ads. Like in ads, you can see that, you know, towards the end or the beginning of the ad, they're talking to Google, they're talking to Alexa in the ad, right? So that like Alexa can hear you, like the commercial can hear the commercial itself, right? And so Alexa's going to be like, oh, okay, cool, I heard that, got it, like I got it down, right? And so you're being marketed to multiple ways just through like your TV now. because there's this device that is part of your family, really.
Yeah,
like
that's right.
That's kind of
right. But also a really naive part of your family who can easily be punked by TV ads,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Or you
so
got
true.
immediately after this, we should all Google parrots talking to Alexa. It's like there are
Oh my
all
gosh,
these
that's
cases
the
of
cutest
people.
thing
Oh,
to
I've
do.
never seen that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, it's like parrots adding stuff to shopping lists, turning lights on and off.
Really?
Because they hear you
Yeah.
talking to your Alexa, and so they just pick it up, right? And so
Sure.
they're just like,
Yeah,
Why not?
lovebirds are the coolest. Like just like it's so they'll just like tweet
Order
to it
pizza
and, like,
for
respond.
bird, Alexa.
right, you got to be careful what you say in front of your parrot.
Yeah.
And Alexa can't tell the difference. I mean, that's
No.
they're getting better at it, but this is an interesting nuance of designing for this stuff that in terms of sort of designing for the grain of the technology, the grain here is that the machines are weird. And so the design that we have to do is not designing fixed paths through information that's under our control anymore. We used to say design for the happy path. Now you're designing for error and failure.
Yeah.
And how do you recover from that gracefully and help people understand what's going on when they get bad or suspect.
Right, you don't want to be technically wrong, and that sounds. I mean, it's a book, but it's about like how machine learning can be, biased or just completely by accident, right?
Sarah Walker Boettcher.
Yes! Oh my gosh! Hands on! I love
She's
it.
great.
How do you go about, designing a skill or, anything like a machine learning kind of situation for a big enterprise company?
Yeah,
Like how can they use Alexas and their Google assistants, et cetera, to make their either their jobs easier or their product better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always two questions that you ask when you're about to build one of these things: is how do I build the right thing, and then how do I build the thing right? And that's, I would say that often we don't spend enough time on how do we build the right thing. It's often sort of something that somebody has an idea, and then it's like, we're going to make this thing. And I think that the work of design, especially of like UX researchers, is trying to figure out where can we actually make the most impact, not just the impact for the business, but in the impact of the person's life who's using it. And I think that whether it is sort of some of the efficiency of talking to Alexa in the moment, anywhere, hands-free, eyes-free, what are those opportunities, and where in sort of the customer journey can you have the biggest impact of answering a question quickly and casually in that way. But I think that there's also sort of an interesting thing of machine learning generally, which is, what are the moments where we find ourselves doing error-prone, joyless, repetitive tasks that the machines can sort of do that part and bring some new insights so that we can do the part that's not horrible. And that's the story of technology, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's the story of technology. And it sometimes has unintended consequences too that we can't always predict.
Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen in the future?
Yeah. But the other part of building it right is the great news is that all of these technologies, certainly including Alexa skills, really low. It turns out really sort of low barrier to entry. It's like if anybody who has sort of some basic sort of front end development skills can quickly sort of get at least a very sort of simple hello world Alexa skill going. And so there's the hard work, and I work with clients a lot on sort of product invention exercises to sort of figure out how do we make sure that we're building the right thing, where do we build this in there. But once you do it, you can also get prototypes out really quickly on these new speech platforms. But also for other stuff, it turns out Amazon and Microsoft and Google and IBM are all giving away their machine learning APIs, at least sort of common uses of them. So it's like, you don't know how to do computer vision, camera vision? No problem. It's like you can have it essentially for free. It's like the guts of what make Alexa go, you can get at that essentially for free or at low cost from Amazon. They're giving this stuff away because they want your data. They want to get better at it.
Right.
So at least for prototyping stuff, it's a great environment.
Yeah, it's really cool too. I know there's Azure and there's like this thing where it can like tell who is who and what is what. Like, could literally find celebrities in a crowd, like, oh, that's Bernie Sanders, right? Like, that's the coolest freaking thing.
Right. And not only can it find Bernie Sanders and identify Bernie Sanders in a crowd, it will also tell you what his emotional state is and estimate his age. And it's sort of like all that stuff of analyzing video or photo, faces. It's, you know, it's all very accessible.
Yeah.
So I think that the trickier part at the moment is there is a whole sort of set of stuff that you can do when you want to build your own models and your own sort of stuff. But for a whole vast number of particularly consumer-facing technologies, stuff is available for you to play with today with no sort of prior knowledge of machine learning. You really can. And I think you should build some of those silly, fun experiments that we're talking about. There's a lot of silly, fun things that you can make.
Yeah. I have a friend who made a Twitter bot because he, you know, wants to be a little bit more of a hi Dwayne, to be a little bit more visible on Twitter, and so he uses Instagram, and so he takes pictures of things around, you know, that he's doing, right, like coding or going to meetups, etc., and take a picture of it and runs it through Azure, and it'll post it on Twitter, and it'll say, hey, this is the thing that I've made, right? Like, it's like, oh, it's 12 people in front of a bus eating a taco, right? And then like, it'll be like, is that accurate or not, right? And I think that is the coolest thing. And it's just he just wanted to be more visible on Twitter, and he created this like recognition thing just for funsies. So I think that's pretty.
It's also hilarious.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Sometimes it's like really these naive.
You're like, that is not that. You know, like that is a backpack.
Right. You kind of see what it's thinking, but you can understand its confusion. But it's like it's really sort of charming sometimes. And that's what I mean by the fact that the machines are weird, is they see the world in different ways than we do. And so I think that there's a lot of fear that the machines will somehow replace us. There's sort of the Hollywood version of that. And they understand the world so differently and with such a sort of a different perspective. I think the better way to think of it is they can actually just be like really interesting and useful sidekick companions to us that in the best form help to amplify our judgment and engage it in interesting ways so that we can be better, more interesting versions of ourselves instead of having to do sort of some of the slog. We can look to the sun a little bit.
Yeah, well said. You know, I wanted to ask you about one of your very interesting creations from early on with the couch to 5K.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and I know you went out with everybody on a run. What was it, on Monday?
Yeah, and this morning we can do it again tomorrow.
Oh, that's awesome!
Sort of little group runs for the conference.
Do you feel compelled to be the one to organize everybody to run every time we go to a conference?
You know, I've only started doing it recently, and it's something that I found is because I was going to go anyway. I was like, oh, this would be sort of, and it turns out to be a nice way for people who were like me going to go out for running to do it together, and we have sort of casual ways to talk. It's like so speakers and attendees. We had about 10 people today, which is a record. It's like not a lot of people will come out at 6:30 in the morning or whatever after the conference party the night before. But yeah, and so thanks for mentioning Couch to 5K. That was something that I wrote the schedule a little over 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh, really? Has it been that long?
Yeah, and I wrote it for my mom to sort of help her to get. My mother was the original Couch to 5K.
Oh my
runner.
gosh, I love it so much.
She's still doing it. Like she's in her 70s. She walks more now, but she's like walking half marathons.
Oh my goodness,
that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's great. Since then, Couch to 5K has helped like millions of people. It's been adopted by the UK's National Health Service as a national fitness plan. It's grown so far beyond me. I really can't take credit for it. It's for all the people who've found some inspiration in it to make some changes or try some new things in their life. So it's been a cool thing.
Wow, that's so neat.
Yeah,
I love that. That's something that you were able to take, make something, and now it's its own kind of entity out there helping people.
It really shows that sometimes you just sort of drop these seeds and it grows up into something much bigger than you would ever imagine. It's been genuinely a humbling thing to see this idea that I put out there, almost like my original open source project that just, I haven't made any of the apps or podcasts, and yet this whole ecosystem of apps and podcasts and websites and communities have grown up around it out of the sort of the core schedule itself.
That's so amazing. Yeah, you'll be able to enjoy the felicity of that for time to come.
It is amazing just hearing people's stories about it, because it's not just sort of, oh, I ran a 5K.
Mhm.
It turns out that for a lot of people with fitness, they run into it. It's a defeat. You know, it's like, oh, I tried to do this, I couldn't do it. This is not something that I can do. It's not something that I have within me. And it's sort of because you run into these defeats, it shapes your perception of yourself.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I've heard from people who found it's like, wow, I am now able to jog for 30 minutes. I got a new job. I changed my relationship. Like I've heard these stories of people who this experience changes their life. So it's this interesting thing of that I think that you can think about with design in general is this thing that you are creating may have ripple effects beyond what you're doing. Those could be terrible effects. They could be very positive effects. You don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
You can sort of do your best and sort of try to corral it in a certain direction. But I think whenever we're making anything, it's useful to think about what is the best case scenario if this goes huge. But also, what's the worst case scenario? And what's our responsibility with these things?
Yeah, just that little droplet could touch so many people's lives.
Yeah, it's been an amazing ride. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, it's like so many karma points.
Thanks. Trying to change the user experience of running.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for being here.
Super appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Too. It's so good to be a part of this sandwich.
What do we say, pumpernickel?
Pumpernickel. That'll do. I love it.
We're gonna have a lot more sandwiches coming up, so stay tuned, and we'll catch you in a little bit. But enjoy the pumpernickel.